Hey everyone, this is Precog from the Headphone Show, and today I have something for you guys that I've been wanting to do for quite some time, and that is the Kilobuck IEM Shootout. And the reason why I want to do this is because the price of IEMs has steadily skyrocketed. I see $2,000 IEMs, $3,000 IEMs, $4,000 IEMs, I've even seen some $6,000 IEMs. I don't know about you, but that is insane. I personally cannot afford a good majority of this stuff. While I don't think $1,000 is much more accessible, it is, in my opinion, the ideal price to performance ratio, and when I start hearing diminishing returns kick in the most. So today I have a lineup of 4 of the most well-rounded IEMs in the Kilobuck price bracket. Now I am sure that there are plenty of other IEMs that people will want to see in this comparison, but the honest truth is that it's these IEMs because I have them on hand. I can't have everything on hand, you know what I mean? And with that being said, your contenders are the Sony IER M9, the Hidition Viento B, the Campfire Andromeda 2020, and the Moondrop S8. The Sony IER M9 is on loan from Moa Music. I purchased the Andromeda 2020. I purchased the Hidition Viento B, and it was proxied by a good friend on Discord. Shout out to KW405. And the S8 I want to say is a Shenzhen audio loaner, so go check them out. As usual, what follows are my own thoughts and opinions to the best of my ability. And yeah, disclaimers aside, let's get right into this. I was going to cover the sort of presentation and the unboxing and all that stuff, but then I realized it would take forever to do that for all 4 IEMs, and I basically have written reviews for all of these that you can go check out if that is more your speed. So let's talk about the IEMs themselves more closely instead in terms of fit isolation and comfort. I would say that the M9 and the Andromeda 2020 are the most comfortable for me to wear. The M9 is sporting a magnesium shell and carbon fiber faceplates, and it's just super duper lightweight. It's just very lightweight and easy to get into your ears, and just very comfortable in general. The Sony stuff in particular actually just inspires a sense of confidence and ruggedness when you have them in your hand. There's just no other way to put it. The Andromeda 2020, I think this will be more subjective because of its angular shells. The design is a little bit more chiseled and some ears might find that uncomfortable. The Andromeda 2020 also inspires a sense of confidence, although I will say that the paint job is going to chip inevitably over time. Now the S8 is the IEM that actually fits the best for me, but it's not the most comfortable because of its tendency to sort of build up pressure over time. In terms of aesthetics though, I think they've nailed it. It is a very beautiful IEM, and it basically just captures the essence of the word Moondrop in a faceplate. Now the Hidition Viento B is the least comfortable of these IEMs for me to wear. It has a very elongated nozzle, and the reason for this is because it's intended to mimic the CIM version as closely as possible. It's just a little uncomfortable for me because of that. Something that's pretty cool though is that you can see all the little wires and stuff going on inside. The work is not the cleanest honestly, but it's just really cool to see, and I love the faceplate on this IEM as well. Okay, on to the sound talk. As usual, I will throw up the frequency response graphs on screen so that you guys have a better reference for what I am talking about. And all the usual disclaimers apply. These were taken off my IEC 711 coupler. There is a resonance peak at around 8 to 10k hertz, and measurements after the 10k hertz resonance peak point should not be considered accurate. So first, let's talk about the Andromeda 2020. And the Andromeda 2020 follows a sort of neutral warm tuning, whereas a lot of IEMs these days are sort of shooting for more academic target curves, at least the good ones. The Andromeda 2020 actually sort of leans in the opposite direction. It has quite a lot of mid-bass, so it's pretty warm down low, and then it contrasts this to a more dipped upper mid-range. So vocals are going to be very relaxed and pleasant to listen to on the Andromeda 2020. And where the Andromeda 2020 deviates from its predecessors is the treble. The treble on the Andromeda 2020 is not as mid-treble emphasized, so you're not going to hear as much sparkle. On the other hand though, I think that there is still pleasing amounts of it, and the extension on the Andromeda 2020 is superb. In general, the Andromeda 2020 strikes a very pleasing tonal balance. It's in that sweet spot in my opinion, where it doesn't sacrifice tonal balance, but at the same time it's quite engaging and pleasant to listen to. Now on the other hand, the Moondrop S8 is one of those target hitters I was just talking about. It adheres fairly closely to the Harman target, but there are little deviations here and there that I think make it just that much more pleasant to listen to. The bass, as is characteristic of most Harman target hitters, is fairly sub-bass oriented. It curves off at around 200 hertz. You have the leaner lower mid-range, and then the upper mid-range though, the S8 tones down some of the emphasis at around 3 to 4k hertz. And what this means is that it's still going to be an upper mid-range oriented tuning. It's going to play best with female vocalists, but at the same time it's terrifically balanced and it doesn't delve into the sort of edginess that characterizes a lot of Harman target IEMs. Treble on the S8 also deviates from the sort of roll-off in the air frequencies that the Harman target exhibits. So this is definitely a good thing, and the S8 in fact has quite a bit of treble air. I would say that this is honestly sort of the entry point for which you can expect good treble extension. The Hidition Viento B is pretty similar, but I would say it leans a little bit more referencey. It's basically what you would get if you took the Automatic ER4 XR and then you stacked on some more sub bass and some more treble. Like the S8, the bass shelf is pretty leveled out at around 200 Hz. The lower mid-range is fairly lean, but then the upper mid-range is very, very emphasized on the Hidition Viento B. Personally, the contrast is a little bit too much for me, and the note weight, so the thickness of notes, sort of suffers. It's just a very thin sounding IEM in general, and this is only exacerbated if you cannot quite get the optimal insertion depth with this IEM. Treble likewise is fairly emphasized, particularly in the mid-treble. I don't think it's the emphasis that is the problem so much as it is the way sort of instruments decay. There is quite a lot of ring and resonance to the way a lot of upper harmonic instruments hit. At the end of the day, this is not a poorly tuned IEM. In fact, it graphs very, very nicely on paper, but paper is not practice, and to my ears, it's a little bit too referencey, a little bit too lean in the notes. But yeah, that's just my subjective opinion, of course, and the CIM version apparently rectifies a lot of these issues I pointed out. Now, if there's any IEM that harkens to actually sitting around the campfire, it would have to be the Sony IER M9. It is easily the warmest IEM out of the Shootout, and it sports good amounts of mid-bass followed by a fairly thick mid-range. The treble on the M9 is actually pretty interesting though. It has something of a lower treble suckout, so you're not going to hear the impact of percussive hits so much as you will hear the crash and the zing and the decay. It's more about that stuff. The reason why I think this works, despite how it might sort of graph a little bit wonky, is because it's not fatiguing at all in this respect. It's taking out the initial impact that sometimes can be a bit fatiguing or sound compressed, and at the same time it serves to offset the warmer lower mid-range and bass emphasis. So yeah, in fact, I would say that the M9 is the safest IEM out of this Shootout. It's very pleasing, very warm on the ears, and it's just very agreeable in general. In terms of raw tuning, I would actually put the M9 at the top of the list, followed by the S8, then the Android 2020, and then the Hidition Viento B. At the end of the day, these are all very well-tuned IEMs in their own right. So let's talk about technical performance, because this tends to be the distinction between a good and a great IEM, especially at the Kilobuck level. For imaging in particular, I want to talk about the Sony IER M9 and the Android 2020. Both of them have a quality with which instruments sort of float on the soundstage. When it comes to positional cues in particular, this is where the IER M9 really shines. Every little instrument, vocalist on the stage, you're going to be able to pinpoint where they are exactly. And the thing about this though is that the IER M9 is not the type of IEM to sort of slam these details into your face. They're very spread out and they're sort of there for you to sort of explore on your own. And that's what I really like about its positional cues. I didn't understand it the first time I heard it, and over time I have grown to appreciate it more and more. On the other hand, with the Android 2020, you're going to notice its imaging chops immediately. It has a very, very wide soundstage, a lot of depth, and for a sense of holographic imaging in general, it is just very obvious once you hear it. Something I will point out is that it has a 3 to 4K hertz per session in the upper mid-range. And what this sort of does is it lends to the perception of center image distinction, where it makes it feel like the vocalist is actually there in front of you. A song that I think really, really highlights this is Taeyeon's Fine. When the song goes into the chorus, there's a series of vocal overdubs, but the thing is they come from all different points of the center image. With a lot of lesser IEMs, there's a tendency for these vocal overdubs to sort of smear into each other. When you have an IEM like the Android 2020, not only do they not smear into each other, but you can tell that these vocal overdubs are actually coming at varying depths on the stage as well. And that's just something that you don't hear at all with a lot of other IEMs. This song alone, as crazy as it sounds, is sort of what makes the Android 2020 so special for me, and the way it just images these vocal overdubs. It's one of those IEMs that when you put in your ears, you'll immediately know what holographic imaging is. And I think this is important because holographic imaging is a word that's slung around and misused very, very often. There's very few IEMs, at least that I have heard, that truly qualify this buzzword. And along these lines, the S8 and the Hidition Viento B are a whole lot more average in the imaging department. Where these IEMs really shine, or I wouldn't even say shine actually, where these IEMs are above average is in the positional cues department. And even then they don't match the IER M9 by quite a bit. Okay, let's talk about dynamics. And when I say dynamics, I am most closely talking about transient attack, the initial leading edge of a note. The Campfire Andromeda 2020, the S8, and the Hidition Viento B are very characteristic of most balanced armature IEMs. And what I mean by this is that they have a very quick attack and they're very good at scaling macro details. On the other hand, the Sony IER M9 is pretty interesting. It's not sluggish or blunted at all. It's very, very resolving, honestly. But there is a certain lack of intensity to the way it scales dynamic swings. And this has more to do with macrodynamics and microdynamics, which are decibel peaks and valleys in a given recording and how an IEM scales them. The IER M9 just really does not scale them at all. It sounds very flat all throughout its dynamic range. I would also say that this is an issue of the Andromeda 2020. And this is particularly noticeable in the mid-range, so more on a more microdynamic level. With a lot of vocal inflections and sort of more nuanced hits, it sort of smears them over just a little bit and you don't quite get that microdynamic contrast. So it might be interesting to note that the Hidition Viento B actually has the best microdynamic contrast to my ears. Little nuances and tracks just sort of pop out at you, and I think part of this has to do with its decay. And along these lines, I want to talk about timbre, which, within the context of IEMs at least, is mostly a reference to the pattern of decay. Especially when you're talking about balanced armature IEMs, which tend to decay faster, there is a tendency for this to result in a sort of metallic smearing, which is often referred to as BA timbre. And while the Hidition Viento B has a lot of this sort of BA timbre and grain and then its decay, at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing because it makes details sort of pop a little more than they would otherwise. On the other hand, the S8 and the Campfire Andromeda 2020, they're fairly clean in their decay, but they're not as nuanced on a microdynamic level as a result. The Sony IER M9 though is something special in the decay. It just might be one of the cleanest balanced armature IEMs that I've heard. It is clean to the point of which I could see a listener mistaking it for a dynamic driver IEM. It's really just that clean. And some of these benefits clearly extend to the bass. If you have ever heard a balanced armature IEM, then you probably know that they don't have the best bass. They tend to decay a little too quickly and they're a little bit limp on the slam side of things. This is where the IER M9 really shines in my book. It's not quite as good as the U12T in terms of nuance, but it is really, really good by BAIM standards. As usual, I want to do a wrap up where I will give a Twitter review summary on each one of these IEMs. In first place, we have the Sony IER M9. The IER M9, as much as I'm not a big fan of it on a subjective level, it is, in the most objective sense possible, the most well-rounded IEM on this list. It basically runs circles around the other three IEMs here in the bass and timbre departments. So if you just don't have a specific sound signature in mind, or you just want the safest IEM on paper, then this is the one that I would take a look at. In number 2, I have the Campfire Andromeda 2020, and this is my personal favorite out of the list. The Android 2020's imaging is just spectacular. And it is the IEM that you hand by default to someone who has no idea what good sound is because you want to knock their socks off. It's my personal favorite again, and just this is an IEM that I think you have to listen to sort of understand what's going on with it. At number 3, I have the Moondrop S8. The S8 is the best bang for your buck on this list, and it's the IEM I would take a look at if you are prioritizing female vocals in particular. It's also sort of the entry point for good treble extension in my book. And last but not least, I have the Hidition Viento B at 4th place. The Viento B is an IEM that I would probably avoid unless you have won the genetic lottery, and you can sort of cram those very long nozzles into your ears for a deep fit. That or just look at the CIM version instead. And yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for this review, guys. I hope you guys found it informative, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching.